guarantee that we will see a situation of a full restoration of this injustice next week.
Deputy Moynihan, and then the final response from the Minister.
I can't overemphasise the need for this injustice to be remedied as quickly as possible, Minister. It's good, and thank you for the detail there on it. It's good that the report will be published next week. Will there be an opportunity to debate that report then once it's published, whether it's here or in subcommittee, or will you be able to immediately get about making the changes on it? And also, you mentioned earlier about after 2020, where there will be a total contributions scheme in place. In the event where people find that that new system is not as favourable to them as what they now have, will they have the option of switching from one to the other and ensuring that they have the maximum pension available?
Final response from Minister Doherty.
Firstly, to you, Deputy, flattery will get you absolutely everywhere, and I say that tongue-in-cheek. I can't tell you that I have the support of the Minister for Finance because he doesn't know what I'm going to propose, and he won't until I sit at the Cabinet meeting tomorrow. So I should talk to him. I do talk to him, yeah. I haven't put the proposal to anybody. The proper protocol to go through, as I learned to my or lack of experience before Christmas, is to go to sub-cabinet committee. That meeting is at 2:30 tomorrow. Depending on the outcome of that meeting, the report will, or the proposal will go to cabinet on Tuesday. And yes, Deputy, we can report, or we can discuss the report as long as you like. I genuinely hope. Well, it won't delay it. It won't delay it because, to answer your question for a second time, and again, Deputy, it does involve new money. So it doesn't. The money that's required does not exist in the current 2018 budget. I hope there won't be a need to discuss it, because I hope that you will be as happy as I might be if it gets accepted on Tuesday. But anyway, look, if you want to talk about it, that's no problem.
We'll move on to question number 9. Deputy Willie O'Dea has 30 seconds to introduce. Deputy O'Dea.
What question is that?
Available.
Question number 9. Oh, yes, sorry. I want to apologise, actually. The reference to family income supplement in question 9 should read working family payment.
Okay. Which will I? Look, the cat bids. The Working Family Payment, formerly known as VIS, is a work-in support which provides an income top-up for low-earning employees with children and offers financial incentives to take up employment. It's currently benefiting over 57,000 families with almost 130,000 children, with an estimated spend this year of 431 million. So I think it's definitely working and doing exactly what it's aimed to do. As part of the process of developing the Working Family Payment, the Department carried out extensive analysis of the range of supports that it provides to assist individuals in their attempts to take up employment and to move away from welfare dependency. And the analysis showed that the existing in-work supports are actually very effective, and they work well in assisting individuals to make the transition from unemployment into employment. And in particular, the work supports such as the Working Family Payment and the Back to Work Family Dividend. And as I agreed during the debate of the Social Welfare Act in 2017, which was enacted in December, I am committed to bring forward a report to the Committee on Social Protection reviewing the operation of working family payments, and that includes a requirement to work the 19 hours per week or the 30 hours per week per fortnight to qualify for the payment. So we're currently working on that report, and I'll bring it to the Committee as soon as it's prepared, and I would expect that will only be maybe weeks, if not a short number of months. I believe that the redesignation to a working family payment provided for under the 2017 Act better reflects the nature of the payments, and the Department intends to encourage families to see if they are actually eligible for the payment by way of a promotion and an information campaign early this year. I'm quite sure that there still are considerable numbers of people who don't even know that they are actually able to avail of this payment. So we're going to do a proper campaign and use the national media and social media. It's also intended to continually review the package of supports offered to working parents to continue to ensure that they meet the objectives of the people that they serve. So finally, Budget 2018 increased the income thresholds by €10 for families with up to 3 children, and that change will take place from effective the 29th of March, alongside other changes that we made in the Social Welfare Bill. And it is likely that as a result of this increase, hopefully additional families currently not in receipt of the Working Family Payment will become eligible for the scheme.
response. One of the questions I was going to ask you answered for me, that the hours are going to be part of the consideration. Can you give us an indication how quickly that... Sorry? Thank you very much indeed. You're most kind. Anyway, can you give us an idea when approximately we'll be in a position to see this report so that the committee can discuss it? And do you envisage a situation, Minister? You said that the budget last year for FIS was in the order of 430 million or thereabouts. So obviously the working family payment is going to cover a wider area, so the budget for that is going to be considerably larger. Would you agree with that?
Minister.
In-house report, it's not like we're waiting for external bodies to conduct it first. I'd say maximum 3 months. Now, if I can do it before 3 months, then we'll talk about it and we'll put it on the schedule for the committee. And yeah, you're right. Like 431 is what's budgeted. There is a bit of wriggle room in there on the basis of that it's not what we spent last year, but it's going to be demand-led. So if there's more needed, there'll be more found, and that's the end of it. Because what I want to make sure is that everybody who should be availing of this particular scheme, not only because of the changes of the increase of the €10 threshold, but also those people who genuinely don't know about it, learn about it, apply for it, get it, and for it to be as effective as it has been for the other families to be able to move from welfare dependency into employment. And if we can make those changes that I know are important to you around the 19 hours and the 38 hours to make it more effective and flexible, well then let's do that. Like, at the end of the day, it's taxpayers' money. It's there to help people to move from a culture of dependent on social welfare payments into being wholly independent just by being supported by the state as opposed to being totally supported by the state. So let's do that as soon as we can.
Deputy O'D, if you wish.
Yeah, well, yeah. In addition, Minister, I mean, you will appreciate that work patterns have changed. You now have more part-time work, etc. So, I mean, I think it's only fair, it's only proper that the social welfare system should reflect that.
Again, fall in love with you because I'm agreeing with everything on you. So I do agree with you. The purpose of the payment is to make sure that we support people who are moving from welfare dependency into employment. And what we've done so far works, but it does probably need some tweaking to get a wider net of people into this particular working family support. So yeah, let's, as soon as we can have a look at it properly, let's then devise the changes that need to be made, if there are any changes that need to be made, to make sure that we reach the widest range of people to support as we possibly can.
Before number 10, but I would just suggest that romantic references should be left outside. Number 10 is Deputy Brady.
Yeah. There's no fear of me going down that route anyway.
Sorry. Yeah, I'll deal with that. I'll deal with that.
Minister, you welcomed on a number of occasions the findings in the Silk report for 2016, but you omitted to make any reference to the 4% increase in at-risk families at risk of, or children at risk of poverty for lone parent families. So, Minister, I'm asking you for your views, for your comments on that the increase, which has to be said a substantial increase of 4%.
Now, just before we take that question, Deputy O'D has raised with me that his number 36 has his view that it should have been grouped. The department decided otherwise, so I'll give Deputy O'D supplementary. Okay, Minister to respond first.
Is it the same question?
10 and 36, but you can handle it.
You reckon?
I think so.
Actually, he's probably right. Thank you. Okay, so we'll take 10 and 36 together. The CSO survey on income and living conditions for 2016 showed that for lone parent household, the consistent poverty rate is 24.6%, and it's down a little bit from the previous year of 26.2%. The deprivation rate fell from 57.9% in 2050 to 50.1% in 2016. But you are right, the at-risk of poverty did increase from 32% in 2015 to, from 36% to 40%. And I think, and I hope we would all acknowledge that the best way to tackle poverty, particularly amongst lone parents, is helping them find a job. And the recent report published by Endicon shares that view. The report found that the changes to the one-parent family payment scheme made over the last number of years increased employment and reduced welfare dependency. And it also found that the changes increased the probability of employment and higher employment income from parents who are the sole parent to a child or children. The report also concluded that assisting lone parents to enhance skills and also needs to be seen as a key objective, as low-paid employment, which is something that none of us want any of our people to aspire to, on its own will not ensure a reduction in the risk of poverty. So what we want for people who don't currently have a job is we want a job, a better job, and then we want a career. And we need to ensure that the training and the support services that we give, particularly people who are lone parents, who historically wouldn't have been working in any real numbers, that career path to actually make sure that they can get real, decent paid employment, not just part-time minimum wage employment. In 2017, further to budget improvements were implemented, and I have continued to emphasise the improvements for lone parents in particular. My department's social impact assessments of all of the budgets from 15, 16, 17 and 18, I hope, are an indicator of these improvements, because they show a cumulative increase of €36.75 in the average weekly household income to unemployed lone parents, and €33.60 for unemployed lone parents. Sorry, the other one was employed lone parents. And this compares favourably with a weekly increase of €34.45 for the average household. Budget measures recently announced will take effect again from the 29th of March, and they're specifically the increases to the income disregard for lone parents, the primary rates and the increase of the qualified child rate. We'll see lone parents on the one-parent family payment or the job seekers transitional payment who are working 15 hours a week on the national minimum wage better off by about at least €1,000 per year.
And I welcome your response. And I make reference again that you put out a press statement after the publication of the Silk report. You made reference to it here again this morning, but you specifically left out any mention of lone parents, because it is an increase, and that goes against this narrative that everything is on the up. But certainly it isn't on the up for lone parents. A 4% increase at risk of poverty is a huge increase, Minister, and that's borne out in the Endicon report that was published last year as well, last October. So there's clearly a problem here that isn't being addressed. Minister, and I agree, the solution to this is to get people back into the workforce, but there's huge barriers here, Minister, in getting particularly lone parents back into the workforce. And we have one of your predecessors, Joan Burton, who made the changes that directly impacted on lone parents, saying she would not introduce those changes until we had affordable childcare. And affordable childcare is a huge barrier to getting particularly lone parents back into the workforce, and it hasn't been addressed, and it's not going to be addressed, certainly by this government. So, Minister, outside of that, what specific measures are being taken for children in lone parent families to ensure that they are not in that trap, in that poverty trap?
Minister.
I think, as I referred to in a previous question, Deputy, first of all, there are barriers, not just to lone parents gaining employment. There's barriers to everybody who's unemployed, to the long-term unemployed, to the short-term unemployed. And my job and our department's and officials' job is to break down those barriers and to assist and to help people. And we have a specific plan that has been enacted and that actually the Endicon report shows is working, notwithstanding, obviously, that a lot of those people who are now less welfare dependent have a lesser income. But as I said to you, my role and the department's role is to get people a job, a better job and a career. And that's why we're focusing so much on education and advancement and training for lone parents. The bursaries were introduced by the Department of Education. We have incentives within my own department to improve the standing and the skills of people in that area. That's our job. And I suppose maybe it's naturally and it's human. When a report comes out, you're going to concentrate and focus on the positive parts of the report. But I've never shied away from reflecting on the fact that lone parents in this country are probably one of the most maligned and vulnerable sets of people in this country, which is why they were my main priority in the budget, and I don't think you can discount that. I beg your pardon, sorry.
Deputy Brady and then Deputy O'Dea. Deputy Brady.
Well, Minister, I mean, you say lone parents were one of your key target groups in the budget. Yes, I have to admit there was small changes. I don't think it goes far enough. I mean, a €2 increase in qualified child, I mean, that has to be regarded as small. It's trivial. But, Minister, if you have a look at the Indicon report and you have a look at the survey that was carried out, there was 11 specific questions put to lone parent families in relation to their availability or affordability of basic items such as fuel, as a decent coat or decent shoes. And they've all said, anyone that was surveyed said that they are in a worse position than they were 12 months ago. So there's huge challenges here, Minister. And you know, you can talk, you can say you're on their side, but action speaks louder than words. There's a lot of other actions that should and could be taken, and certainly Sinn Féin put forward a lot of those in our alternative budget. But Minister, these figures are 2016. You know, the Indicon report are probably more up to date. There's huge problems here, Minister. You need to take on board and make changes.
Supplementary from Deputy O'Dea and then the Minister, and then going to number 10 then. Number 11.
Yeah, Minister, doesn't it worry you that you know, we spoke about the Silk report earlier and some slight improvements in poverty levels, but doesn't it worry you that in relation to some of the indicators for lone parents, the thing is moving in the opposite direction? For example, the risk of poverty for lone parents has increased from 36.2% in 2015 to 40.2% in 2016. Now, there are slight improvements in the other indicators, but the fact still remains that one in four of lone parents in this country are still living in consistent poverty, and more than 1 in 2 are experiencing deprivation. And, you know, when I read the Indicon report, it seemed to suggest to me that the changes brought about by Deputy Burton in 2012 gave rise to an increased probability of risk of poverty as a result of those changes. Now, what we've been doing, as Deputy Brady alluded to, what we've been doing since those changes is bringing incremental measures here and there to alleviate the consequences of what was done in 2012. Wouldn't it be simpler and more efficient, and I suggest just as cheap, to revert to the 2012 situation? Have you any figures of what it would cost to revert back to the 2012 situation?
Minister, final response.
Do you know what's interesting is that both of the deputies would criticise me for not highlighting a particular negative result in the report and just focusing on the positives of the report, yet neither of you are willing to acknowledge the very positive contributions that Budget 2018 did make to lone parents, and I think that's a pity and it says a lot about you. The answer, Deputy O'Dea, is no, we're not willing to reverse the changes that were made because they're working. And there were two separate things done, and if you just bear with me just for 1 second, I'll tell you why. There were two separate things done around that 2012. The changes that were made with regard to us intensifying our activities with lone parents in order to move them from entirely being dependent on a social welfare system into getting a job. And I'm moving that policy now from being just getting a job to getting a better job and getting a career by the introduction by Richard Bruton of the bursaries to provide full-time educational supports for lone parents, by me intensifying the interactions with lone parents to make sure that we do not just tick a box because they happen to be working in a local supermarket or a coffee shop or the local school. I want to make sure that when we move these people from social welfare dependency into employment, that it's good employment, it's sustainable, long-term, well-paid employment. And the only way we'll do that is to continue our interactions with people to make sure that when they get a job, they get a better job and then they get a career. And that's the commitment that I'm giving to people with lone parents. So we won't be reversing any of the changes that were made in 2012. What we will be doing is drawing back on the cuts that have been made to those people, but intensifying our interactions with people who have barriers to providing and getting full-time employment, to make sure that we break down those barriers, and whether those barriers are childcare or lack of training or any other facilitative measures that we need to do, well then that's the job of the department and our inter offices to make sure that we provide those services to people who need them.
Thank you, Minister. The next question. is from Deputy Catherine Connolly. Maybe we'll just take a question and an answer because we've just a little over 2 minutes left.
Just very basically, the question is how many applications for exceptional needs payments were there in 15, 16 and 17, and how many were granted?
Can make a single exceptional needs payment to help meet essential once-off expenditure which a person couldn't be reasonably expected to pay for out of their weekly income. The Government provided £36 million for exceptional payments last year. The exceptional needs payment scheme is demand-led, and payments are made at the discretion of the officers administering the scheme, taking into account the requirements of the legislation and all of the relevant circumstances of the case in order to ensure that the payments target those most in need. Statistics are maintained relating to the payments. However, they are not maintained on the number of applications or the outcome of those applications. So approximately 100,000 emergency need payments have been made over each of the years of the last 3 years, and the details of the exact number of payments are set out in the tabular report that comes with the written response to the statement. For reporting purposes, this data also includes the number of urgent need payments that were made, which accounts for a small number of those payments. And a UNP, an urgent need payments, is a once-off payment made to a person who might not ordinarily qualify for a supplementary welfare allowance payment, but does have an urgent need that they can't pay for it themselves. So I know it's nuanced, but it is slightly different. And people who would qualify for an urgent need mightn't qualify for a supplementary welfare payment. And any person who considers that they have an entitlement to a payment, be it an exceptional needs payment or an urgent needs payment, I would ask you and all of the other deputies in this House to ensure that they contact the local Interior Office and our social welfare community officers, where we will be very happy to facilitate them.
Deputy Connolly, 25 seconds.
So can I accept the answer at this point?
Okay, sin dere mar sin le ceisne chun an aire gnóí fostíochta agus cuimeach Soisialí agus rachamid roiig an iscatí ceisne óna Gannarí, and I call on Deputy Micheál Martin for leaders' questions. Deputy Martin.
Tánaiste, I think many people of a younger generation will be appalled as they read today's newspapers in terms of the treatment of Joanna Hayes 34 years ago by agencies of the state, including An Garda Síochána and the Lynch Tribunal, which was established by the Oireachtas and by the State Tribunals of Inquiry, and the very hurtful manner in which she was treated, causing enormous distress to her, a young woman, and her family. And the complete lack of empathy shown at that time through agencies of the state was shameful and represented a damning indictment on the institutions of the state and perhaps in society at that time as well, and I'll come back to that later. She was wrongly accused of murdering a baby. She was put through a horrendous tribunal which was meant to inquire into the failures of An Garda Síochána in the conduct of the investigation, but which essentially turned into a cross-examination of Joanna Hayes herself, and I think, in the words of Brendan Connolly, one of our most famous poets, he compared the tribunal to a medieval witch hunt, with the victims burning at the stake and the crowd dancing around the fire. And that about summed it up. And it's interesting, the release of state papers, and sometimes people will say, you know, it's the era, and we will say everything is attributable to the era. And sometimes that is true, and in this case it partially explains perhaps some of what went on in the context. But even then, at that time, the then Garda Commissioner Larry Wren described the performance of the Gardaí, as revealed in state papers now, as grossly negligent. So there are also lessons for us today, that there is no absence for professionalism in everything the state does. in terms of investigations, in terms of the conduct of tribunals and so on. So, notwithstanding the culture, the era and the mores of the time, there are still very significant lessons to be learned by the agencies of the state today in terms of how we deal with citizens in our society and the moral approach we can take. Now, I would ask you, Taoiseach, and I welcome, I understand that Taoiseach has issued an apology on behalf of the state to Ms Hayes and the Hayes family. I've been speaking to Deputy Brazil, who has spoken to the Hayes family. They're very anxious that their privacy would be respected. They don't want to relive, and she does not want to relive, the horrors of what happened back then again. So I think I'm on their behalf. I'm making a plea generally that their privacy would be respected in this difficult time. But I'm also asking you, will the state adequately, without any negotiation, adequately and properly compensate Joanna Hayes for what happened, and not have to put it through any duress or any process, but do the honourable thing, acknowledging the terrible hurt that was caused, and make adequate and appropriate and fair compensation.
Thank you. Taoiseach.
First of all, can I thank Deputy Martin for raising this issue in a sensitive manner. I want to personally welcome the apology that was made yesterday by the Garda Commissioner to Joanne Hayes and the Hayes family, and I also want to join with both the Minister for Justice and indeed the Taoiseach, who have made apologies on behalf of the state. And as Taoiseach in this House, I would like to do the same. I was thinking yesterday, as I'm sure others were, as this story was being written about in the media, where I was and what age I was at that time. I was starting secondary school, and it was I think people would like to think it was a very different Ireland in terms of the approach to women and pregnancy in those days. But I also accept the point that's being made, that there were real policing mistakes made. There were also mistakes made in the subsequent tribunal in terms of how a woman and a family was questioned. It was described afterwards as insensitive, very, very frightening, harrowing and quite horrific and shameful. That was how the tribunal was handled in terms of the description of the Dáil Committee on Women's Rights subsequently. So I think there are lessons to be learned here for the state, and also I think there is a need to respond to the family's wishes for privacy, so that a woman that had to go through an extraordinary ordeal of accusation and blame doesn't have to relive a lot of that awful period in her life, as indeed her family, an extended family, should not have to go through that either. So what I would like to say is to restate the Taoiseach's apology to her and to her family. As regards the final question that Micheál Martin asks in the context of compensation, we will certainly try to deal with this issue in as sensitive a manner as possible, but I'm not empowered or at liberty to say right now how that should take place, but I'm sure that's something that the Government will try and make a quick decision on.
Deputy Martin.
I thank the Taoiseach for his response, and again to reiterate that the Hayes family, I know they've been speaking to Deputy John Brazil, are very anxious that this does not become a political football in any shape or form, and are very, very anxious that their privacy would be respected given the trauma that has already been caused, and they certainly don't want to go through all of that again, and that is very clearly articulated to us. And I think, as I say, Taoiseach, the lessons are there to be learned in terms of how we approach issues like that, even in today's world. We've had a number of cases in relation to children and so on like that, and only recently reports from Tusla. It's a warning to us, again, or a reminder of the absolute necessity to keep looking for the highest standards in terms of how state agencies conduct their affairs. In relation to the compensation, the only reason I raise it, the state generally has a defensive approach to issues like this even when it's very, very clear, that wrong was done by the state. Apologies have been issued by the state. I'm not articulating on behalf of anybody, by the way. No one has asked me to make this point. I just think there comes a time, and in respect of certain issues and certain events, where the state should take the lead and just do the right thing and the fair thing in a situation like this. And I appreciate the Taoiseach's comment.
Thank you very much. Taoiseach.
Deputy, I take the point that sometimes in tragic circumstances where the state is responsible for wrongdoing, and there are questions of redress or compensation that are being discussed, there is often a concern in terms of the setting of precedent. I don't think that trying to deal with this case in a sensitive way sets precedent, given the extraordinary circumstances around it. So I will ensure that that issue is raised, as I know Minister Flanagan will, and the Taoiseach himself. Could I also say, though, that there is effectively an active Garda investigation still underway in the context of what happened to baby John in this case. And can I join with Minister Flanagan and others in urging anyone with information about the death of baby John to please come forward, so that the other tragic element of this case could be resolved through an appropriate Garda investigation as well. But I think today our primary thoughts need to be with the Hayes family, and I think that the call for privacy, I hope, will be heeded by the media as well as by politicians, and I would appeal to them to do that, so that we can show that Ireland has moved on in terms of how we cover these tragic stories, and that we provide a respectful response to the family in terms of how these stories are covered and debated by politicians.
Deputy Adams.
Well, I want to welcome the government's apology to Joanne Hayes, and obviously the emergence of this very tragic case is going to be very traumatic to Joanne and her family and to the mother of baby John, and I want to express our solidarity with them. I want to raise with you, Taoiseach, the government's abject failure to provide essential services for children with a disability in the care of the state and for children with disabilities in the community at large. And I did this yesterday with the Taoiseach following the damning report of the Ombudsman for Children regarding a complaint about the treatment of Molly, a teenager with Down syndrome and severe autism. And the investigation found that the state has been denying her the necessary supports and that it abdicated its responsibility. It found that the state's actions had a negative effect on Molly and that she did not have the opportunity to reach her full potential. Now, the HSE and TUSLA have accepted the recommendations of the Ombudsman. They had little choice, but they have pointed out that their commitments are resource dependent. Now, there are also other serious issues in respect care services, the poor treatment of carers. There's a huge resource and funding deficit in provision of child and adolescent mental health services. And you'll know, Taoiseach, that one of the privileges of being a TD is that we meet with many people, carers, groups in the voluntary and community sector who provide services to these citizens. And these are services that should, in the first instance, be provided by the state. And I want to commend everyone for this outstanding work, because many, many more people would fall between the cracks if it wasn't for this. And many of these agencies are Section 39 agencies, and they provide a range of vital care for citizens living with disabilities, in need of hospice care, rehabilitation services and a whole range of health services. The funding for these agencies was cut by a Fianna Fáil-led government in 2010 and a Fine Gael-led government in 2012. And frontline staff had their pay cut in line with public service workers. They also lost their increments. The restoration of this pay is now being refused, and that's absolutely unfair. It's also bad economics. If these services are further reduced or removed, the citizens they care for will be condemned to a lesser quality of life, but the state will also have to pick up the tab as they end up in hospital or some other overstretched services. So the crisis in Section 39 agencies has now reached a tipping point. And your government needs to put in place a process for pay restoration for the staff of Section 39 agencies. You have a responsibility to address this issue before a strike on February the 14th. If this strike goes ahead, it will compound the crisis so sharply felt by vulnerable citizens. But, Taoiseach, it's not too late. So will the government sit down with the unions representing these workers to work out a positive and fair resolution?
Thank you, Deputy Adams. Taoiseach.
First of all, can I say, in relation to the Molly case, which I know you raised yesterday as well, Deputy, the Children's Ombudsman report is indeed very concerning. It highlights a gap in the provision and coordination of supports and services by TUSLA and the HSE to children with a diagnosed moderate or severe disability in foster care. Minister McGrath and Minister Zappone are taking and have taken these findings very seriously. TUSLA and the HSE accept the Ombudsman's report in full and are committed to implementing the report's recommendations. Having received a note from Minister McGrath, Molly's supports are now in place. There is a joint protocol agreed and being implemented, which will result in structures to support better care planning and transition arrangements between the HSE and TUSLA. The above provides an important opportunity to review all existing placements. TUSLA reports there are 450 cases in the category of moderate to severe to profound disability range. So I think we are responding to a necessary need and gap that has been exposed by the Molly case. In relation to Section 39, can I say, first of all, that the Government absolutely recognises the invaluable services by Section 39 organisations. A number of deputies in this House, I'm sure, have met many of those organisations, as I have myself, in the context in particular of hospice care. Undoubtedly, there is work for the Government to do here in terms of resolving this issue, and we are committed to doing that. Minister Harris and Minister Donoghue and indeed Minister McGrath have been working collectively on this for some time. There is now a process in place to ensure that we have an appropriate review mechanism to ensure that the assessments are made of Section 39 organisations to ensure that, where appropriate, the state can make the necessary decisions outside of FEMPI legislation, which doesn't apply to Section 39 organisations, to ensure that service provision can continue in the future. So I take the case, for example, of Marymount Hospice in Cork, which others will be familiar with, that are providing essential healthcare services and have essentially been mirroring pay agreements within Section 38 organisations and across the HSE generally. And so there is a need to bring some certainty in terms of the budgeting for many of these essential healthcare services and indeed potentially services outside of healthcare also.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
And the Government is committed to doing that as quickly as possible.
Deputy Adams.
Well, your answer is disappointing, Taoiseach, I'm sorry to say. We just dealt with a historic case. We deal with many historic cases. The Ombudsman's report wasn't dealing with a historic case. This is happening on our watch. This is happening now. Those children with disabilities are being denied backup support now. And the issue around the reduction in pay and the refusal to restore pay to the people who actually look after them is happening now as well. It's great that Molly has got her support. It took 15 years, and her foster mother was put through the ringer to get to that point. Now, the Labour Court has acknowledged the link between the grades in the public service and Section 39 agencies, but so far the Government has not engaged, to my knowledge, with SIP2. So I'm asking you to make a very clear commitment to open up talks for a better process of pay restoration for the sake of the workers involved and for the vulnerable citizens that they serve.
Thank you, Deputy Adams. Taoiseach.
I'm not sure which part of my response you were referring to when you said whether it was the Molly case, whether it was disability services generally and the significant increases in resources that are being provided, or whether it's trying to resolve the Section 39 issue. But can I say that the Government has engaged with unions Minister McGrath himself met SIPTU just before Christmas. So we have been engaging, and we are looking for a sensible and appropriate solution to this issue. The government absolutely acknowledges the need for this issue to be resolved. We are not opposing the Fianna Fáil motion that's going to be debated this evening, and I think that is a signal of what we are trying to do. Minister Harris has asked the HSE to enter into a process of engagement with Section 39 organisations to establish the factual position regarding pay reductions and pay restoration. At this point, it's not clear that cuts were applied in a universal manner. It is, in my view, clear that cuts have been applied in certain organisations, Deputy. Yeah, but sorry, we're not.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
We're not talking only about hospices, and I think the case for hospices is very clear. But we are talking about Section 39 organisations across a number of different sectors, and what the government is committed to doing is to establishing the facts so that we can make the appropriate determinations in relation to pay restoration, and we will do that as quickly as we can.
Catherine Connolly.
Minister, over the last 2 years, our attention on the opposition benches has been focused on housing, and rightly so. And notwithstanding the new government, the new Taoiseach, the new minister and the various new plans, the crisis has worsened. And to any reasonable person looking on, the situation has become an emergency, with people dying on the street and a 30% increase in the number of homeless children since this time last year. Declaring an actual housing emergency is a prerequisite, in our opinion, to actually dealing in a sustainable way with the housing crisis and allowing you to pursue alternative solutions. Yes, the private market will have a role in those solutions. However, public construction of housing, or public housing construction, the provision of affordable houses, shared ownership schemes, regulated rented markets and a much bigger role for cooperatives will be vital in the alternative solutions when you see your way to declaring a housing emergency. Tragically, for our people, this is not happening, and the government's failure to learn from its mistakes and its reliance on the private market to provide, albeit with the full support of taxpayers' money, is worsening the crisis. And I want to focus on Galway now as an example of what reliance on the free market has allowed to happen in our city. We have a population in a beautiful city of 80,000 people. We have a waiting list of approximately 13,000 people going back to 2001. We have land in the inner city which is earmarked as key regenerative areas. Kent Station with 14 acres and the dockland, an inner dockland of 2-point-something hectares. No master plan, no area action plan, no overall vision. We're back to developer-led development, and I'm drawing your attention to that and placing it on the record that the development in Galway, where we have land zoned, where we have public land in Kent Station and the docks, is developer-led, number one, in relation to the sites that have been sold off, and in relation to the existing sites. They're in the process of selling off public land in Kent Station. No master plan, no local area plan whatsoever. In a city where we have a city development plan that demands and sets out objectives for such plans, which talks about sustainable development, mixed communities and inner communities in the city. We have the regional plan, which was further to a discussion document which talked about getting away from developer-led development and learning lessons. No lessons have been learned. Not one house has been constructed by public funds in Galway since 2009. At this point, Minister, all I can do in my 3 minutes, A, draw your attention to the crisis, B, ask you to look at that crisis and use whatever legal power you have to intervene in Galway, and at the very least to listen to the department, which in its previous guise as the Department of the Environment set out, prior to any strategic development zone going on it, that there should be at the very least a local area action plan. Thank you.
Yeah, and can I say that we often disagree in this House, Deputy, but on virtually everything you've said, I agree with you today. We do need to ensure that as we rebuild a housing sector that can provide homes for people, both social housing and affordable private housing, that we do that in a much more effective and planned manner, and not allow it to the vagaries of the market. And that goes for Galway as well as many other towns and cities across the country. That is why in the next few weeks we will be bringing forward a new national planning framework, which is about planning for 20 years ahead, planning for an extra 1 million people in Ireland, and ensuring that cities like Galway and Cork and Waterford and Limerick plan in a sustainable way to accommodate the needs of people who need homes and housing. Yes, it's true that at the moment there is a reliance on the private sector to provide social housing solutions in the absence of publicly owned and publicly built social housing. But we are changing that, and we're changing it rapidly. We are dramatically increasing the number of social housing that's being provided by local authorities and AHBs, approved housing bodies, and we are seeing a significant ramping up of the private sector as well in terms of delivering the homes that people need. And if you look at the stats from last year, it bears that out. And it also shows that the Rebuilding Ireland plan, which is a 5-year plan, and we're only 18 months into it, is actually working. We've seen over 17,500 new homes commenced, which is an increase of 33% on the previous year. We've seen over 19,000 homes were connected to the ESB. That means they're either newly built homes or they haven't been occupied for the last 2 years. We're seeing planning permissions granted last year for over 18,000 new homes. And that doesn't include the figures in terms of planning applications under the new fast-track planning system for large developments. We saw last year 25,892 was the number of new households that had their housing needs met in terms of social housing demand. So these are much, much bigger numbers than last year and the year before and the year before that. But it takes time to solve this problem. And so people who call for instant solutions with tens of thousands of social housing that supposedly can be built within 6 or 8 months are not being realistic. What we are doing is, we started with a plan 18 months ago that is now delivering dramatic increases in delivery of both social housing, private housing and housing that are affordable to first-time buyers. In terms of Galway, there are particular problems in Galway. I accept that, but last year there were, the figures I have is that there was 100 houses newly built, bought or voids brought back into use in terms of social housing, and there are 350 currently in the pipeline, and I can get you the exact details as to where they are, Deputy, although I know you know Galway well.
Deputy Connolly.
Thank you, Minister. There are 199 people homeless in Galway, and that doesn't include those in refuges, on the couches and so on. Let me just deal with facts. I am asking you as Minister, and I'm asking the Government, to immediately take action, not to build houses tomorrow. I'm a very pragmatic, realistic woman. I am asking you to take action in relation to the developer-led development on the sites in Galway, which will see 2,600 jobs for office workers in a multi-storey complex with not one single home provided. I'm asking you to take action in relation to the absence of a local area plan, an absence of a master plan on brownacre sites in Galway, which are being sold off as we speak, predominantly Kent Station and the docks. I'm asking you to take action in relation to the non-compliance with our city development plan, your own national planning framework, which I'm very familiar with, and all of the national guidelines, the planning guidelines, which are being flagrantly non-complied with. When we have a housing crisis in Galway and public land with various public agencies and accommodation for offices go up for that many people, figure 2,600 and not one home, then we not only have a scandal on our hands, but we are actually not learning one single item from a debacle. And I'm asking you again now to listen to what I'm saying and to take action, not to construct a house tomorrow, but to ask serious questions of why there's no interconnecting plan for lands which would solve or partly solve our housing crisis over the next few years with the building of homes.
Deputy, I'm I'm slow to offer too much commentary on my previous brief because Minister Murphy is responsible for it now. But I mean, I have spent time, and I'm sure he has too, with senior management in Galway, City Council and County Council, and both together, to talk about how we face the challenges that you are outlining in terms of a dramatic housing shortage, whether it's student accommodation, whether it's social housing or whether it's affordable housing. And those conversations continue. And there is ongoing dialogue between the Department of Housing and local government in Galway to ensure that plans are being addressed. One of the reasons why we asked local authorities to actually produce an audit of all available land for housing but also for commercial development was for that very reason. But we also have to try and ensure that we are developing mixed developments, that we're not using every piece of land that we have for housing if, in some circumstances, it's not suitable for that. So we have to ensure that we are building communities and that we're going to have sustainable societies into the future that, of course, address housing need, but also employment need and so on. And it's about balancing those competing interests and getting it right, which is what the Department of Housing and local government should be doing together. And my understanding is that that is exactly what they are doing together in the context of Galway.
Thank you. Taoiseach Deputy Ruth Coppinger, please.
Thank you, Ceann Corla. And other parties have begun by referring to Joanne Hayes, and I would like to express the hope that political parties that contributed to the atmosphere of that time, to the witch hunt of that woman, will draw the necessary lessons that women should have privacy and autonomy over their own lives. Now, Taoiseach, 5 weeks ago, the All-Party Oireachtas Committee voted that we should have a referendum to repeal, a simple repeal of the 8th Amendment, and that abortion will be legalised up to 12 weeks without restriction. This was the culmination of a process that was set up by your government, but people are none the wiser as to the simple question: is the government now going to accept or set aside the recommendations of that committee? Later today, many young people are expected to assemble at the Dáil as part of the Strike for Repeal movement. They want to listen to the debate, and the questions that they want answered are simple. Now, these young people know nothing of the Ireland we got a glimpse of yesterday, of dead babies on beaches, of Salem trials of a woman. What they believe in is bodily autonomy. They won't accept politicians procrastinating, and they're the people who will actually face crisis pregnancies in the future. So the questions we need answered are: is it the government's intention to honour the Taoiseach's commitment for a referendum in late May? And in order to meet that time frame, will your government do 3 necessary things? Number 1, will you move the first stage of a repeal referendum bill late next week? Number 2, will you set up the referendum commission, which has asked for 16 weeks in which to operate? And number 3, will you publish legislation that contains abortion up to 12 weeks on request? Now, 4 weeks ago, the committee report was published, and for the number of deputies who haven't had time to read it, you think they were asked to read War and Peace rather than a short report. As is usual, when it comes to the rights of women and the decisions of women, TDs are wrestling with their consciences in a way they never do about cutting hospital beds or bailing out banks. But it's women who should be allowed to examine their consciences about this decision. That is the reality, not politicians. Let's worry about whether people with crisis pregnancies can sleep at night rather than Taoiseachs or TDs. And this really should be simple for politicians. Do you, as Professor Arul Kumaran said at the committee, do you support legal or legal abortion? That's the simple question. And do you want to force people to remain pregnant? That's all you have to ask yourself. Societal attitudes have moved on considerably. There is now a new middle ground, and even if there wasn't a majority now for abortion rights, 60% in the last Red C poll, parliaments have to legislate for societal need and reality. So, Taoiseach, in summary, my question is this: for the young people who will gather at 5 o'clock, will you respect the recommendations of the Oireachtas Committee? Will you give a date when the repeal bill will be first moved through this House, allowing the referendum commission to be established? And will you ensure that legislation gives real abortion rights regardless of your own personal opinions?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
Thank you for that question, Deputy. First of all, in relation to the timeline and in terms of what the Government needs to do, the Taoiseach has made it clear that the Government is committed to a referendum, but there is a procedure that needs to be followed to ensure that that becomes a reality. This is something that we agreed as a Government as a three-step process quite some time ago. We would set up a Citizens' Assembly who did a very good job. And then the recommendations from that process would go before an Oireachtas committee, who I also think did a very good job, debating and discussing and making recommendations. There wasn't unanimous agreement, but there was majority agreement. And the third part of that process that we committed to was the Government would then consider, following a debate in the Oireachtas, the recommendations of that report and make a determination in terms of how a referendum should proceed and what question would be asked. And we are moving through that process and that we are now at the start of the third stage of it. The timeline for procedural steps compiled by the Department of Health envisages a series of memoranda being submitted to Government in the period of late January to early March. Subject to Government approval of each memorandum in turn, it is proposed that a constitutional amendment bill must be initiated and passed by both Houses during the period of March to mid-April. A referendum commission must also be established, subject to Government approval. Previous commissions have indicated that 4 months is required for a commission to do its work properly. A referendum must be held not earlier than 30 days and not later than 90 days after the Constitutional Amendment Bill has passed the Houses of the Oireachtas and a polling day has been agreed on. And of course, in parallel with that, we have committed to putting together the heads, at least the heads of a piece of legislation to try to set a context around the answering of the question that people will rightly ask if they vote to either remove a section of the Constitution or replace it with something else. What will the reality be after that in terms of legislative certainty? And that is a question that people will want answers to. We are beginning a detailed debate in this House this evening. I don't think we should be drawing conclusions before that debate even starts, Deputy, which is what you seem to be suggesting we should be doing in terms of making commitments. The Government wants to hear what all parties and all contributors to that debate have to say, and then the Government will have to make decisions around the Cabinet table in terms of how we proceed.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Coppinger.
Obviously, it's reasonable for the whole Oireachtas to have a debate on this issue. I have no problem with that. When that debate is finished today and tomorrow, my question is this. If we're to meet the time frame of May 25th, which I think everybody would agree is an optimal time to have a referendum allowing young people, students, etc., vote before exams, etc., begin, we need to have about 6 weeks for the repeal bill to move through the Dáil. That was according to advice given to the Government before the committee sat. Now, if there's new information that's saying we don't need that, so that's why I'm raising it now. The hemming and hawing that's taken place from the Taoiseach and from many others isn't giving any confidence that that will actually happen. The second issue is this. I actually agree that legislation should be published on abortion. And the reason I agree is this. I have no confidence that this Dáil, with its current make-up, could actually be trusted to enact that legislation unless it gets a public endorsement in this referendum. So I think people should know what they're voting for, and I'm actually confident that they will accept it.
Thank you, Deputy.
But the key issue now is, will you meet those timelines? There's a simple repeal bill. We all know it's a very simple bill, 1 or 2 lines. And we've got one here. If you don't want to move it next week, maybe right. Solidarity and People Before Profit will move it ourselves next week.
Thank you very much. Taoiseach, to conclude, please.
I'm not sure that would be conducive to this House moving forward together if opposition parties are going to start trying to force the pace on something. What we're trying to do here, and I think what the Taoiseach has given great leadership on, is to try and recognise the fact that there are differences of opinion that are deeply held, linked to people's personal circumstances and experience. Many in this House have have very strong views in relation to these issues, in the context of the need to protect women in a more comprehensive way than we do today, but also in the context of the responsibilities we have towards children and unborn children. And we are, as a government, trying to bring forward a proposal that can allow the people of Ireland to make an informed decision in terms of what they are deciding on as regards our constitution, and also the consequences, if they make a decision to change the constitution, what the new realities will look like. That's complicated. It's not straightforward. It requires legal advice from the AG, and it requires thoughtful political debate that listens to everybody's perspective.
Thank you, Tom.
And then tries to come up with an approach that I hope all parties will be able to support, so that we try to take the party politics out of a very divisive and difficult and emotive issue.
Thank you very much.
That is what the Taoiseach is trying to give leadership on, and I think so far he's done a good job on that. And we will try to meet the timeline that he has set in terms of trying to ensure that we have a referendum in late May or early June. He's the one who has tried to put a process in place that can get us